I am Amelia Mary Earhart. I was one of the first female aviators in the 1920s, and this is my story. On July 24th, 1897, I was born in Atchison, Kansas, and named after both my grandmothers, Amelia and Mary. My family included my mother, Amy Earhart, my father, Edwin Earhart, and my soon-to-be little sister, Muriel Earhart. Soon after Muriel was born, I was sent off to live with my grandmother. There, even through my grandmother's disapproval, I grew up to be a tomboy by nature. I loved to explore caves by the riverbank, make up adventure stories in the barn, or play big daring games. I guess my tomboy nature kind of spread to my sister Muriel. She also had no interest for girl activities such as imaginary tea parties. Instead, we loved to play boy activities like baseball and football. I also loved to ride horses. And my hobby became collecting specimens like dead insects, spiders. I once even collected a cow's skull. But our favorite pastime is spending time with our father. I remember how he used to take us fishing and play cowboys and aliens with us. He also made up the most amazing stories to dazzle me and my friends. Muriel and I loved our father very much. He was the most entertaining, playful, and amazing father ever. But he wasn't a perfect father. He had a bad habit of spending money he didn't have. So he was in a lot of debt. Trying to get out of debt, he took jobs all over the place, making us move from place to place all the time. But that wasn't the only problem he had. Because of his financial troubles, he started becoming an alcoholic. That made him go from being an irresponsible but fun-loving father to an erratic, unreliable man whose employer didn't trust him anymore. When Grandma Amelia Otis died, it just made it that much worse. She didn't trust our father, so in her funds, she left us nothing. That made our father furious, and he lost his job yet again. Later, our mom finally set her foot down. She left our father and took Muriel and me to live in Chicago with her friend. I was 17 then. Much later, during the World War I, I became a volunteer nurse at the Voluntary Aid Detachment. But that career didn't last long. I soon took up flying. Back at that time, flying was a cool new dangerous sport, and I've been wanting to try it ever since my first joyride with my dad. So I started taking flying lessons. My instructor was a woman named Netta Snook. She was one of the very few women pilots you could find. After only 2.5 hours of instruction, I decided to buy my very own experimental plane. I could barely afford it, but with that, I went on my first solo flight in 1922, and I set an altitude record of 14,000 feet. Sadly, the record was soon broken. 6 years later, in 1928, I rode as an observer on a flight from Trepassey Bay, Newfoundland to Berryport, Wales. This kind of made me famous as the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air. Then in 1931, I married a man named George Palmer Putnam. He was a wealthy publisher, and he helped me organize my 1928 flight. The next year, I flew across the Atlantic alone from Harbour Grace, Newfoundland to a pasture near Londonderry, Northern Ireland, and I was the first woman to do that. This made me an important figure in the movement to develop commercial aviation. Then in 1937, I took the plunge. I decided I would be the first person to ever fly around the world. My navigator Frederick J. Noonan and I left on May 20th to begin our journey. Our first stop was in Miami to repair and adjust the plane. Then we landed again in New Guinea. On July 1st, we left for the largest part of our journey, to Howland Island. And that's when it happened. The next day, a U.S. Navy vessel picked up radio messages I sent before, reporting empty fuel tanks. Hearing that, they tried to make radio contact with me, but failed. And despite the massive searches, I've been missing since then.